Before books filled our shelves, before stories were written down, they were carried by voices around fires, across generations, from one traveler to another. Welcome to Fireside Stories. Tonight, let's revisit one of the tales that refuse to be forgotten. There is an old Slavic saying, never linger beside the river after sunset, especially in early summer, because if you hear laughter drifting across the water, you may not be alone. The sound might belong to a young woman. Her voice is gentle, almost joyful. She stands among the reeds with flowers woven through her long hair. She smiles as though she's waiting for someone. If she beckons, don't follow, because by morning only the river will remember where you went. Across Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, and other parts of the Slavic world, people have told stories for centuries about mysterious women who appear beside lakes and rivers. They were called Rusalki. Some believed they were restless ghosts, others believed they were ancient spirits of rivers and forests. Some feared them, others honored them. Like many old legends, the truth depended on who was telling the story. Unlike many creatures of folklore, there is no single story that explains the Rusalki. Ask one village and you'll hear that they are spirits of young women who drowned before their lives had truly begun. Travel a little farther, and someone will insist they were brides who died before their wedding day. In another place, they are the souls of women who died during childbirth, or children who were never baptized, or ancient water spirits who had existed long before people settled beside the rivers. Each story is different, but they all share one quiet idea. Some deaths come too soon, and when a life ends before its time, something may remain behind. Not every spirit finds peace. Some continue to wander the places where the living last saw them. For the Rusalki, that place is always close to the water. Lakes, marshes, quiet rivers where the reeds sway even when there is no wind. As spring gives way to summer, they are said to emerge from the depths, not as monsters, but as young women almost untouched by time, beautiful, silent, and impossibly sad. If you ask what a Rusalka looks like, the answer depends on where the story is told. But certain details appear again and again. She is young, her skin is pale, almost luminous beneath the moonlight. Her hair hangs impossibly long, sometimes golden, sometimes black, sometimes the green of river weeds. In many stories, it is always wet. Water drips from the ends of her hair, no matter how long she has stood upon the shore. She often wears white, a simple dress that moves with the breeze even when there isn't one. Sometimes she wears a wreath of white flowers gathered from the river bank. Other times she appears exactly as she died, beautiful but carrying the quiet sadness of someone who should never have died at all. People rarely see a Rusalka in daylight. She belongs to twilight, to moonlight, to the strange silence that settles over the water after the birds have stopped singing, and she is almost never alone. Some legends speak of entire groups of Rusalki dancing together in forest clearings or among the reeds. They laugh, they sing, they hold hands beneath the moon. From a distance, it almost looks like a celebration until someone gets too close. The songs begin softly, not loud enough to startle, just enough to make a traveler pause. A fisherman listens for only a moment longer. A shepherd wanders from the path. A curious child steps towards the river bank. Then the laughter changes. Some stories say the Rusalki draw their victims into a dance so wild that exhaustion takes them before dawn. Others say they embrace them, holding them beneath the water until the river grows still once more. In parts of Ukraine and Belarus, another version tells of Rusalki who tickle their victims. It sounds almost playful until you learn the ending. Unable to breathe, unable to escape, their victims laugh until laughter becomes agony, and then silence. Yet, for all these frightening stories, the Rusalki were never simply monsters. Villagers believed they could bless the fields with rain, they could help crops grow, or just as easily bring storms, failed harvests, or sickness. Like the rivers they called home, they could give life or take it away. To meet a Rusalka was not simply to encounter a ghost. It was to stand at the edge of a world where nature and the supernatural were impossible to separate, and where one careless step could carry you into both. For the people who first told these stories, the Rusalki weren't believed to haunt the rivers every day of the year. They belonged to a particular season, in late spring, as the fields turned green and the rivers swelled with snowmelt. There came a time known in many Slavic traditions as Rusalvik or Rusalia. It was a time when the boundary between the living and the spirit world grew thin. People believed the Rusalki left the water. At night they wandered through forests, across meadows, and among fields of young grain. Some said they danced in circles beneath the moon. Others believed they swung from the branches of willow and birch trees, laughing like children. Where they danced, the grass was said to grow taller, the earth became greener, the fields more fertile. But the same spirits who could bless the land could also bring misfortune. Children were warned not to wander alone. Young people avoided swimming in rivers during Russell Week. Travelers hurried home before sunset. It wasn't simply fear, it was respect. Villages marked the season with rituals meant to honor or safely send away the Rusalka. In some places, young women wove flower wreaths and floated them down rivers. Elsewhere, songs were sung at the edge of lakes and streams. Some communities carried decorated branches through the village before casting them into the water, symbolically returning the spirits to the rivers they called home. By the end of the week, the Rusalki were believed to disappear once again beneath the surface. The danger had passed. The rivers belonged to people again, at least until the following spring. These traditions reveal something important. The Rusalki were never understood as simple monsters waiting to kill. They were part of the rhythm of the natural world, as much a sign of changing season as blooming flowers, returning birds, or rising water. To live beside the river was to accept that nature could be generous and unpredictable, beautiful and dangerous, and sometimes those two things were impossible to tell apart. Like many old legends, the story of the Rusalka didn't remain the same. It changed with every generation that retold it. As Christianity spread across the Eastern Europe, older Slavic beliefs slowly blended with newer religious ideas. Spirits that had once been tied to rivers, fertility, and the changing seasons began to take on darker meanings. The Rusalka became less like a spirit of nature and more like a restless ghost. People began telling stories of young women who had drowned before their time, women abandoned by lovers, brides who never reached their wedding day, girls who died with broken hearts. In these later tales, their sorrow bound them to the places where they died. The river became both their prison and their home. By the 19th century, writers and composers had embraced this tragic version of the legend. One of the most famous retellings came from the Czech composer Antonin Dvořák, whose opera Rusalka tells the story of a water spirit who longs to become human after falling in love with a prince. Unlike the older folklore, she isn't seeking revenge, she's searching for love. But like so many fairy tales, love comes at a terrible price. Russian poet Alexander Pushkin also explored the legend, presenting the Rusalka as a haunting reminder of betrayal and loss, rather than simply a creature of the river. These stories carried the Rusalka far beyond the villages where she was first imagined. She appeared in paintings, poems, operas, films, modern fantasy novels, and video games. Today, many people picture the Rusalka as a Slavic mermaid, beautiful, lonely, deadly. But beneath every new interpretation, the oldest spirit still lingers, the one who danced beneath the moon, who wandered through flowering fields during spring, who reminded people that rivers could nourish life or claim it without warning. Perhaps that's why the legend has survived, because every generation sees something different in her: a ghost, a fairy, a victim, a warning, or simply the river wearing a human face. For centuries, people living beside the rivers of Eastern Europe believed there were places where the living should not linger after dark, not because every splash in the water hid a monster, but because rivers have always held mysteries. They gave life, they carry travelers, they feed villagers, and sometimes they take people away without warning. Perhaps that is why the Rusalki have never had a single story. In one village they are restless ghosts, in another they are spirits of spring, elsewhere they are forgotten daughters, unfinished lives, ancient guardians of the river itself. Each generation has imagined them differently, yet every version asks the same question: what happens to those who leave the world too soon? Do they simply disappear, or does something remain behind? Perhaps the Rusalki are not frightening because they drown travelers. Perhaps they are frightening because they remind us how easily a name, a face, an entire life can be swallowed by the water. And so the stories continue, passed from one generation to the next, told beside rivers, around campfires, and on quiet summer nights when the reeds begin to sway. So if you ever find yourself walking beside still water and somewhere beyond the mist you hear laughter or singing or see a young woman standing among the willows, don't be too eager to follow. Some stories say she's waiting for company, others say she's simply remembering the life she lost. Either way, the oldest advice is still the wisest. Let the river keep its secrets. Every culture tells different stories, yet somehow they all speak to the same hopes, fears, and the same questions that make us human. Thank you for joining me around the fire. Until next time, keep the stories alive.